My mother completely forgot my doctorate graduation. When I called her from the empty auditorium, she simply said they had already eaten. They were at my older brother's backyard barbecue. My father grabbed the phone and told me not to be so dramatic. That was the exact moment I decided to legally change my name, vanish from their lives, and never return. What I did to them 4 years later shocked everyone. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. My name is Camilla. I am 33 years old, and until that defining Tuesday afternoon, I still foolishly believed that hard work could earn my family's love. I was standing on the brightly lit stage of the university auditorium, the heavy velvet of my doctoral gown draping over my shoulders. The dean had just called my name, adding the title of Doctor of Biomedical Science to it for the very first time. 5 years of grueling research, countless sleepless nights in the laboratory analyzing genetic algorithms, and endless sacrifices had culminated in this single moment. The crowd was a roaring ocean of applause and cheering. Flashbulbs went off like tiny lightning strikes across the massive hall. I accepted the leather-bound diploma cover, smiled for the official photographer, and turned to look out into the sea of proud families. My eyes immediately sought out the second row, Section B. I had pulled strings and cashed in favors with the faculty administration to secure 4 premium VIP seats. I had mailed the embossed tickets to my parents a month in advance, complete with a detailed schedule and a map of the campus. I looked at those 4 premium seats. They were completely empty. The red velvet upholstery of those vacant chairs felt like a physical blow to my chest. All around those empty seats, families were standing, waving wildly, holding up handmade signs and massive bouquets of balloons. To my left, a classmate was blowing a kiss to her weeping parents. To my right, another graduate was pointing happily at his cheering siblings. I watched a father in the front row wiping away tears as his daughter crossed the stage. I watched a mother rush forward to hand her son a bouquet of lilies. The contrast made my chest ache with a hollow, burning pain. I stood there, clutching my diploma, utterly isolated in a room of thousands. The only flowers I had were a modest bouquet of yellow roses I had purchased for myself from a corner grocery store that morning, just so my hands would have something to hold. I had told myself that today would be the day they finally saw my worth. I had convinced myself that seeing me in this doctoral gown, hearing the faculty applaud my research, would finally make my father look at me with the same pride he reserved exclusively for my brother. It was a childish hope, and it was dying right there on the auditorium floor. I had tried to tell myself they were just running late. Traffic on the interstate could be terrible. Finding parking was notoriously difficult. But as I walked down the wooden steps of the stage, the cold, harsh reality began to settle into my bones. They were not stuck in traffic. They simply did not care. I should have known better. The warning signs had been blaring like sirens for weeks. I remembered sitting in my cramped, off-campus apartment just last month, exhausted after successfully defending my dissertation. I had called my mother, Brenda, to confirm they had received the VIP tickets. Instead of congratulations, I received a bitter lecture. She complained for 20 straight minutes about the $50 campus parking fee required for the graduation event. She called it a ridiculous extortion for a useless piece of paper. She sighed heavily into the receiver, acting as if driving 2 hours to see her daughter achieve the highest academic honor was a monumental burden. Yet, the sting of that conversation was magnified 100 times when I opened my social media later that same evening. There, Beaming brightly in a high-definition photo were my mother and my father, Richard. They were standing in a luxury jewelry store, proudly presenting my older brother, Jason, with a brand new $5,000 Rolex watch. The caption read, "So proud of our successful boy." Jason, who was 36 years old, had just signed a regional distribution contract selling commercial treadmills for a medical supply company. He was drowning in credit card debt to maintain his flashy lifestyle, constantly leasing cars he could not afford and living perpetually beyond his means. But to my parents, he was the triumphant businessman. I was just the foolish daughter draining her youth in a laboratory, pursuing a science degree they could not use to brag to their friends at the country club. I had spent 5 years living on meager research stipends, skipping meals to afford textbooks, and working as a teaching assistant just to keep the lights on. My parents had never offered a single dime toward my education. They claimed that since I chose a path that did not directly generate immediate cash flow, I had to suffer the financial consequences alone. Meanwhile, they had bailed Jason out of 3 separate failed business ventures, paying off his debts without a second thought. To them, a man doing business was an investment. A woman doing science was a waste of resources. The heavy auditorium doors closed behind me as I stepped out into the bustling courtyard. Families were taking group photos by the fountain, their laughter echoing off the brick buildings. I set my store-bought roses on a concrete bench and pulled my phone from my pocket. My screen was completely blank. Not a single missed call. Not one text message saying they were on their way or that they were sorry they were running late. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I found my mother's contact and hit dial, holding the phone to my ear as my heart pounded against my ribs. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Finally, the call connected. But before she even spoke a single word, a wave of loud country music, the sizzle of an outdoor grill, and the roaring laughter of a backyard party flooded through the speaker. "Hello, Mom," I asked, my voice barely audible over the loud chatter and clinking glasses coming through the speaker. "Where are you? The ceremony is over. I am standing outside the auditorium right now." There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by the sound of someone yelling a congratulatory cheer in the background. I recognized the voice immediately. It was my brother Jason laughing loudly about something. "Oh," my mother said, her voice slurring slightly, casual and entirely unbothered. "Is your graduation today? I completely forgot." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She forgot. I had sent the invitations a month ago. I had called her last week to confirm the schedule. I had sacrificed 5 years of my life for this single day, and she simply forgot. "We are over at Jason's house," she continued, not a single trace of guilt or hesitation in her tone. "Your brother just bought a brand new Porsche. We threw a massive backyard barbecue to celebrate his incredible success. The meat was fantastic, by the way. We already ate." I stood paralyzed on the concrete sidewalk as happy families brushed past me. She was talking about barbecue ribs and a luxury car, while I was holding a degree that had cost me literal blood, sweat, and tears. Jason was 36 years old, working as a regional sales manager. He was drowning in credit card debt, taking out loans to maintain a fake lifestyle of wealth and prestige. That Porsche was undoubtedly financed at a terrible interest rate, just so he could show off to his friends. Yet, to my mother, buying a car on borrowed money was an achievement worthy of a grand family celebration, while earning a doctorate in biomedical science was something easily forgotten. Before I could formulate a response, I heard my father's gruff voice in the background. Is she complaining again? Give me the phone. The rustling of the receiver changing hands echoed in my ear. Listen, Camilla, do not be so dramatic about this, my father barked into the phone. You are 33 years old, acting like a child who missed a school play. We are celebrating real success today. Dad, I invited you months ago, I replied, my voice remarkably steady despite the hurricane of emotions tearing through my chest. This is the most important day of my academic career. It is just a school thing, he scoffed loudly, ensuring everyone around him could hear his disdain. Your degree is just a piece of paper that put you into massive student debt. It does not generate immediate cash flow. It does not build wealth. Look at Jason. He is driving a luxury sports car. He is making big moves in the business world. That is what brings real value and respect to this family. You reading books in a laboratory does not pay the bills. Stop ruining the mood with your endless guilt trips. Just call an Uber and go home. The line went completely dead. He hung up on me. I lowered the phone from my ear and stared at the dark screen. For a long moment, the world around me seemed to fade into absolute silence. The laughing graduates, the proud parents holding cameras, the vibrant campus life, it all blurred into the background. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for that familiar, crushing weight of rejection to force me to my knees. I had spent my entire life crying over their casual cruelty, begging for scraps of their attention, twisting myself into knots just to earn a single word of praise. But the tears never came. Instead, the deep well of grief inside me instantly dried up, replaced by an icy, diamond-hard clarity. My father was right about one thing. I was 33 years old. I was too old to keep waiting for love from a family that only valued superficial wealth and empty posturing. They had made their choice. They chose the golden child. They chose the fake prestige of a leased Porsche over the genuine dedication of their own daughter. I turned around and walked away from the crowded courtyard. I marched straight toward the far end of the parking lot, where a large metal trash can stood next to a lamppost. I did not take off the entire gown, but I reached up and pulled the velvet doctoral cap from my head. I took the golden honors cord from my neck. I looked at these symbols of academic validation, the things I had desperately hoped would make them proud of me. I tossed them straight into the metal trash can. I was not throwing away my education. I was throwing away the version of Camilla who needed her parents to applaud it. That pathetic, approval-seeking girl died right there in the university parking lot. I pulled my phone out of my pocket one more time. I did not block their numbers yet. I had one final piece of business to conduct. I opened my mobile browser and navigated to the portal of my private health insurance provider. For the past 4 years, I had been paying the monthly premiums for a top-tier family health insurance plan, covering both my mother and my father. My mother constantly complained about her joint pain, and my father had a history of blood pressure issues. To ensure they had access to the best specialists in the state, I had taken on extra weekend shifts grading undergraduate papers and skipped buying new clothes just to afford that massive monthly bill. I had sacrificed my own comfort to keep them healthy, and they had repaid my devotion by telling me I was a useless burden who did not generate cash flow. I logged into the administrator dashboard. I selected the family policy option. A prompt popped up asking if I was sure I wanted to modify the dependents on this account. I stared at the screen, visualizing my parents sitting in Jason's backyard, laughing and eating barbecue while mocking my life choices. I hit the button labeled cancel policy. Effective immediately, Brenda and Richard were entirely uninsured. If my father loved cash flow so much, he could use Jason's imaginary wealth to pay for his next hospital visit. I slid the phone back into my pocket, walked to my reliable 10-year-old sedan, and drove away from the campus without looking back in the rearview mirror. I unlocked the door to my cramped studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up building. The space was barely large enough to hold my modest furniture, a stark contrast to the sprawling suburban mansion my brother currently occupied. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of the instant ramen I had survived on for the past 3 years. I did not collapse onto the worn-out sofa. I did not bury my face in my hands and weep. The well of sorrow had been entirely depleted, leaving behind a profound mechanical emptiness. I pulled my battered suitcase from the top shelf of the closet and dropped it onto the floor. I began folding my clothes with military precision. I sorted my research files, my textbooks, and the few personal belongings I actually cared about. I was stripping my life down to the studs. My phone buzzed against the cheap laminate of the kitchen counter. The harsh vibration rattled the quiet room. I walked over and glanced at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Jason. "Mom said you were throwing a tantrum and sulking," the message read. "Do not ruin the vibe today. Anyway, Venmo me $200 for the craft beer I bought for the barbecue. The guys drank more than I expected. I will pay you back next month when my commission check clears." I stared at the words. He had just bought a Porsche. He had just hosted a lavish party funded by imaginary wealth, yet he was texting his sister, the sister whose graduation he had just ignored, demanding $200 for beer. I opened the message thread. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed out a furious, blistering response. I demanded to know how he could be so breathtakingly arrogant. I asked him if he had any concept of shame. But before I hit send, my thumb froze. I looked at the history of our messages stretching back years. It was a digital graveyard of my own financial exploitation. I pressed the backspace key, deleting my angry draft letter by letter. This was not a new behavior. This was the established foundation of our family dynamic. Jason had been bleeding me dry since I was a sophomore in college. I remembered working consecutive graveyard shifts at a local diner, saving every crumpled dollar bill to buy a secondhand laptop for my research data. The day before I planned to buy it, Brenda had called me, sobbing hysterically. She claimed Jason was on the verge of a breakthrough in a medical supply venture, but he needed a small bridge loan to secure a warehouse space. She begged me to transfer my savings to him. When I hesitated, Richard took the phone and berated me, screaming that family members must always finance each other's dreams. He promised Jason would repay me tenfold within a year. I transferred the money. Jason did not rent a warehouse space. He used my diner wages to buy a VIP table at a downtown nightclub, posting photos of himself pouring expensive champagne to impress a group of investors who never materialized. When I confronted my parents about the deception, they immediately closed ranks to protect their golden boy. They gaslit me into believing I was being petty and unsupportive. They told me that networking was a crucial part of business development, and my lack of understanding was exactly why I would always be a low-level employee. Year after year, the pattern repeated itself. Jason would launch a doomed venture. He would rack up catastrophic debt. Brenda and Richard would drain their own accounts to save him, and when they ran out of cash, they turned to me. They demanded I sacrifice my rent money, my grocery budget, and my peace of mind to subsidize his illusions of grandeur. During my toughest semester of doctoral research, when I was living on sleep deprivation and cheap coffee, they forced me to co-sign a loan for Jason's luxury apartment deposit. Every single request was framed as a temporary loan. Every single loan was a permanent theft. Jason never paid back a single cent. He just moved on to the next grift, leaving me to survive on tap water and stale bread while he leased luxury sedans. I looked at the glowing screen of my phone. His demand for $200 was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a disease that would never be cured. As long as I remained tethered to this family, I would be their financial blood bank. I would be the designated scapegoat, expected to absorb all their failures and fund all their fantasies. I pressed the contact icon at the top of the screen. I scrolled down past his phone number, past his email address, until I reached the bottom of the menu. I tapped the red text, "Block this caller." A confirmation prompt appeared. I clicked confirm. Just to be absolutely thorough, I navigated to Brenda's contact. Block this caller. I went to Richard's contact. Block this caller. I severed the digital arteries that had kept their toxicity flowing into my life. The phone went completely dark and silent. I turned away from the kitchen counter and walked over to my desk. I opened my laptop and connected to the internet. I did not search for apartments. I did not look for jobs. I navigated directly to the official government portal for the state judiciary. I found the section for family law and clicked on the forms for an adult legal name change. The digital document asked for my current legal name. I typed it in for what I intended to be the very last time. It asked for the proposed new name. I did not hesitate. I typed Camilla Sinclair. Sinclair was the maiden name of a distant mentor who had actually believed in my research, a woman who had showed me more maternal care in 2 semesters than Brenda had shown me in 3 decades. I filled out the sworn affidavit. I checked the boxes required to seal the records, citing emotional and financial abuse and a complete estrangement from my biological relatives. I paid the filing fee using the very last bit of money in my checking account, the exact funds Jason had just demanded for his backyard beer. I printed the confirmation receipt and placed it inside my leather portfolio next to my newly minted doctoral degree. I closed the laptop. The cramped apartment felt entirely different now. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere of obligation had completely vanished. I looked at the packed suitcase resting by the door. The obedient daughter who craved her parents' affection was gone. The exhausted sister who financed her brother's delusions was eradicated. The old Camilla had died a quiet, unmourned death in the university parking lot. In her place stood Dr. Camilla Sinclair, a woman who owed absolutely nothing to anyone. And as I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and walked out the door, I knew exactly what I was going to build from the ashes of their rejection. 3 months passed since the day I threw my graduation cap into a parking lot trash bin and walked out of my family's life. In those 90 days, I did not look back once. I poured every ounce of my energy, every sleepless night, and every brilliant algorithm I had developed during my doctoral research into laying the foundation for Sinclair Biotech. I was renting a tiny commercial space in a quiet industrial park, surviving on black coffee and sheer spite. My phone remained blissfully silent. The blocking feature had effectively severed the toxic umbilical cord that had drained my sanity for over 3 decades. I assumed my sudden disappearance would have sparked some feigned outrage, or at least a passing curiosity. But as the weeks rolled by, the absolute silence from my parents only validated my decision. I was out of sight, and therefore entirely out of their minds. That is, until my brother's financial house of cards began to collapse in spectacular fashion. It was a rainy Thursday morning when the notification popped up on my computer screen. I was deep into reviewing a complex genetic sequencing code when my personal email inbox pinged. I had changed my cellular number immediately after the graduation incident, but my primary email address remained active for professional contacts and utility bills. The sender name made my fingers freeze over the keyboard. It was Jason. There was no subject line. There was no greeting. There was certainly no inquiry about my well-being, my whereabouts, or my newly acquired doctorate. The body of the email was 3 sentences long, dripping with the exact same entitled arrogance he had wielded our entire lives. The email read, "You need to print the attached PDF, sign it in front of a notary today, and overnight it back to my address. I am making some big financial moves and need to leverage grandfather's old property to secure a short-term business loan. Do not drag your feet on this, Camilla. I have a deadline with the bank tomorrow morning." I clicked on the attachment. It was a formal quitclaim deed and a comprehensive power of attorney agreement. My grandfather, before he passed away, had explicitly left his modest but incredibly valuable ancestral home in a joint trust to both Jason and me. It was the only asset our parents had not managed to completely control or liquidate. I read the dense legal jargon carefully. Jason was not asking for a favor. He was demanding that I legally forfeit my 50% ownership of the property, granting him total authorization to use the house as collateral. I knew exactly what his big financial moves were. His creditors were circling. The high-interest, predatory loans he had taken out to lease that pristine Porsche and fund his lavish backyard barbecues were finally coming due. He was drowning in his own manufactured reality, and he wanted to use my half of our grandfather's legacy as his personal financial life raft. Before I could even fully process the sheer audacity of his demand, a second email arrived in my inbox. This one was forwarded by my mother, Brenda. She had clearly been coordinating this ambush with Jason, likely standing right over his shoulder as you sent the initial document. Her message was a masterclass in the exact brand of emotional manipulation that had controlled me for 33 years. "Camilla," her email began, completely skipping any maternal pleasantries. "Jason tells me you are ignoring his urgent business emails. You need to stop holding a grudge and do what is right for this family. Your brother is under a massive amount of pressure right now. He has an important image to maintain in the corporate world, and he needs liquid capital to secure his assets. You are a woman. You do not need to hold on to a dusty old house. You will eventually find a husband who will provide a roof over your head. Jason is the man of this family, and he needs that property to build his empire. Print the document, sign it, and send it back immediately to save your brother from this temporary cash flow issue. Do not be so incredibly selfish." I sat in my quiet office, the blue glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. I read the terrible words again. "You are a woman. You do not need a house. Do not be selfish." They genuinely believed that my sole purpose on this earth was to act as a disposable financial stepping stone for Jason. They believed that my future relied entirely on finding a man to provide for me, completely dismissing the fact that I was a newly minted doctor of biomedical science, currently building a highly lucrative technology startup from the ground up. They did not see me as a human being with rights or feelings. They saw me as an annoying obstacle standing between Jason and his next bank loan. A year ago, an email like this would have sent me into a devastating spiral of anxiety. I would have cried until my eyes were swollen. I would have drafted a dozen different responses trying to defend myself, desperately begging for their understanding. I would have probably signed the document, just to buy a few months of fake family harmony and avoid my mother's wrath. But the woman sitting in this office was no longer their compliant scapegoat. I did not curse. I did not scream at the monitor. I did not shed a single tear of frustration. I simply moved my mouse and hit the print button. The office printer whirred to life, spitting out the crisp white pages of Jason's desperate legal trap and Brenda's toxic demands. I gathered the warm papers, aligning the edges with absolute precision. I placed them in a neat, perfect stack on the corner of my desk. I reached for my newly purchased smartphone and dialed the direct line of my private corporate attorney, a ruthless litigator I had retained specifically to protect Sinclair Biotech. The line rang twice before he answered his phone. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and sharp as a surgical scalpel. "I need you to draft a legal document for me immediately," I told him, staring at the printed emails. "I want the most aggressive, legally binding response the state law allows." Exactly 7 days after my corporate attorney drafted the documents, a bonded courier arrived at my brother's meticulously manicured suburban driveway. I received the delivery confirmation directly to my secure email inbox. I could easily visualize the scene unfolding in Jason's sprawling, heavily mortgaged living room. Brenda and Richard were undoubtedly hovering nearby, eagerly waiting for the signed quitclaim deed that would magically erase Jason's massive financial blunders. They probably expected a tear-stained apology letter from me, begging for their forgiveness and asking to be allowed back into their toxic family dynamic. Instead, Jason tore open a thick, premium envelope bearing the embossed logo of the most ruthless corporate litigation firm in the state. He did not find a signed property transfer allowing him to leverage our grandfather's legacy. He found a heavily worded, legally binding cease and desist order. I had instructed my lawyer to spare absolutely no legal expense and leave zero room for interpretation. The document explicitly detailed their coordinated attempts at financial extortion. It classified their unsolicited emails and aggressive demands for property as targeted harassment. The mandate was crystal clear and aggressively punitive. Any further attempt to contact me by phone, email, physical mail, or through third-party intermediaries would be immediately forwarded to local law enforcement. Any attempt to show up at my residence or my place of business would result in an immediate restraining order and a civil lawsuit for severe harassment. I was legally severing the parasitic financial pipeline they had relied on for over a decade. The threat of police involvement was not a hollow bluff. It was a guaranteed promise backed by a highly paid legal team. But the cease and desist order was only the first shockwave waiting for them in that envelope. Tucked securely behind the heavy legal warning was a second, far more permanent document. It was a court-certified decree bearing the official, shiny seal of a state judge. It was the legal confirmation of my complete identity alteration. The surname they had used to control, belittle, and extort me was officially erased from all government records. The document boldly stated my new, legally binding identity. I was no longer the obedient, overlooked daughter they could summon on a whim to fund their delusions. I was Dr. Camilla Sinclair. To ensure the absolute finality of my message, I had included one last item inside the package. It was not a printed legal form. It was a single piece of heavy, cream-colored stationery featuring my own handwriting. I did not waste my time with lengthy explanations, angry accusations, or emotional pleas for the closure they would never give me. I wrote exactly 2 sentences. Your daughter died on the very day you chose a piece of barbecue meat over her graduation. Never bother Dr. Sinclair again. There was no room for negotiation. There was no ambiguity for my mother to twist into a false narrative of me simply throwing a temper tantrum. I had surgically removed them from my life with the exact same cold, calculated indifference they had shown me on the most important day of my academic career. I did not shed a single tear as I read the delivery notification on my screen. I simply archived the email, closed my laptop, and went back to building my future. The ghost of their endless disappointment could no longer haunt a woman who technically no longer existed. 4 exhausting, relentless, and incredibly transformative years vanished in the blink of an eye. The passage of time did not magically heal the deep wounds they had inflicted, but it fueled an unparalleled, blazing level of ambition inside me. I channeled every ounce of my lingering anger, every sleepless night, and every bitter memory of their rejection into my professional work. I sacrificed holidays, weekends, and social events to build something entirely my own from the ground up. I took the advanced algorithms I had developed during my doctorate and turned them into the foundation of a revolutionary medical technology startup. The cramped, rented commercial space where I started my independent journey was now nothing more than a distant, humbling memory. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my hyper-modern corner office in downtown Seattle. The panoramic view of the sparkling bay and the towering city skyline reflected off the pristine, polished glass. The office was a breathtaking monument to absolute success, decorated in sleek monochrome tones with minimalist furniture that projected quiet, undeniable authority. I was wearing a tailored high-end designer suit, my posture radiating the unshakable confidence of a woman who had built a massive corporate empire from absolute scratch. The heavy oak door of my office swung open with a soft, decisive click. My executive assistant stepped into the room, holding a sleek silver tablet in her hands. Her face was flushed with undeniable excitement, her professional composure barely containing her thrilling news. "Dr. Sinclair," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the spacious, quiet office. "I just received the official confirmation from our legal team in Washington. Our artificial intelligence gene analysis algorithm has officially been granted an exclusive patent. We own the sole rights to the entire technology." I turned away from the breathtaking view of the Seattle skyline and looked directly at her. A slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. The algorithm I had spent years perfecting, the very same doctoral research my father had openly mocked as a useless piece of paper, was now an exclusive, patented technology. It was a monumental medical breakthrough that every major healthcare provider and medical supply distributor in the country would be absolutely desperate to get their hands on. We held the master key to the future of the medical distribution industry, and anyone who wanted to survive in this market would have to come begging at my door. Sinclair Biotech was no longer a scrappy startup fighting for venture capital. Within weeks of securing the exclusive patent for our artificial intelligence gene analysis algorithm, my company transformed into the undisputed apex predator of the biomedical sector. The technology we possessed fundamentally changed how medical devices calibrated to individual patient genetics in real time. It was a revolutionary leap forward, and the massive medical conglomerates knew it. They circled my company like sharks, deploying aggressive corporate espionage tactics, launching hostile takeover bids, and attempting to bury us in endless litigation. I crushed every single one of their attempts. I had spent 4 years building an impenetrable legal and financial fortress around my core technology. I held the master key, and I absolutely refused to relinquish control to the old guard of the medical industry. Because we controlled the proprietary algorithm, every medical supply distributor on the West Coast was suddenly rendered obsolete unless they could secure the exclusive rights to integrate our software into their hardware distribution networks. My sleek downtown office became the epicenter of a corporate feeding frenzy. The phones in the executive suite rang incessantly. My inbox was a relentless flood of desperate proposals, lucrative partnership offers, and blatant attempts at bribery disguised as corporate networking. Powerful executives who would have completely ignored a 33-year-old female scientist a year ago were now groveling for 5 minutes of my time. I rejected the vast majority of them with a simple, automated email response. I was looking for a very specific type of partner to collaborate with. My executive assistant walked into my office later that afternoon, carrying a thick, leather-bound portfolio. She placed it squarely on the center of my polished glass desk with a heavy sigh. She explained that we had an unprecedented situation with a mid-sized distribution firm located just outside the city. According to her meticulous background check, this particular company was actively bleeding capital. They were teetering on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy. Their credit lines were entirely maxed out, and multiple financial institutions were currently preparing to foreclose on their commercial assets. They needed a miracle to survive the fiscal quarter. Apparently, they believed Sinclair Biotech was that miracle. My assistant detailed the sheer, pathetic desperation of their approach. For the past 14 days, they had been relentlessly harassing our reception desk. They had sent massive, ostentatious floral arrangements that I immediately ordered to be donated to a local hospital. They had couriered over expensive bottles of vintage wine, premium golf club memberships, and luxury gift baskets in a frantic attempt to bypass my administrative firewall and secure a high-level executive meeting. They were behaving like a drowning man, thrashing wildly in the water, willing to grab onto anything to stay afloat. They knew that securing the exclusive West Coast distribution rights for our new genetic algorithm would instantly multiply their company valuation and force the banks to back off. Without my signature on a contract, their entire corporate structure would collapse into a mountain of debt within 30 days. I leaned forward in my ergonomic leather chair, my interest genuinely piqued by the sheer magnitude of their impending financial ruin. I reached out and opened the heavy leather portfolio. I bypassed the desperate cover letter pleading for a strategic alliance. I bypassed the overly optimistic revenue projections they had entirely fabricated. I flipped directly to the corporate organizational chart to see exactly who was running this sinking ship into the ground. My eyes scanned down the list of senior management, moving past the panicked chief executive officer and the embattled chief financial officer. My gaze stopped abruptly at the title of Regional Sales Director. The name printed in bold black ink next to the title hit me with the force of a freight train. Jason, followed by my discarded, legally eradicated maiden name. I sat perfectly still. The ambient hum of the city traffic outside my panoramic windows seemed to vanish. I stared at the name of the golden child, the same man who had relentlessly drained my savings to fund his illusions of grandeur, the same man who had hosted a backyard barbecue to celebrate a leased sports car while I stood alone in a graduation gown. He was the regional sales director of a failing distributor, desperately trying to leverage a fake corporate image to secure a lifeline from a billionaire CEO he did not realize was his own discarded sister. The poetic justice of the universe was truly staggering. Jason had built his entire identity on the illusion of business superiority, mocking my academic pursuits as a path to poverty. Now, his professional survival depended entirely on the scientific genius of the woman he had treated like financial roadkill. He had no idea that Dr. Camilla Sinclair, the elusive tech titan he was currently begging for a meeting, was the exact same person he had extorted for beer money 4 years ago. A slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. The temperature in my office felt like it dropped 10 degrees. The universe had not just handed me a silver platter, it had handed me a loaded weapon. I closed the leather portfolio with a definitive snap. I looked up at my executive assistant, maintaining an expression of absolute, calculated composure. "Approve their request for a meeting," I instructed, my voice entirely devoid of warmth. "Schedule them for next Friday afternoon in our main executive boardroom. However, I have a very specific condition before we even consider discussing an exclusive distribution contract." My assistant picked up her digital tablet, ready to record my exact demands. "Tell this regional sales director that Sinclair Biotech only partners with organizations that exhibit deeply rooted stability and traditional values," I said, carefully enunciating every single word. "Inform him that his company financials look incredibly unstable. If he wants to prove his personal credibility and secure this life-saving contract, he must bring the core members of his affluent family to the pitch meeting. Tell him I require visual proof of his established, upper-class backing before I sign away my technology. If he fails to produce his family, the meeting is canceled and we go to their competitors." My assistant nodded efficiently, completely unaware of the lethal trap she was about to set in motion, and stepped out of the office to deliver the message. I turned my chair back toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. The bait was set. The golden child was starving. He would bring them all right to my slaughterhouse. The walls of Jason's meticulously decorated suburban home were rapidly closing in on him. His tailored designer suit felt less like a symbol of success and more like a suffocating straitjacket. He paced the polished hardwood floors of his massive home office, his eyes glued to his glowing phone screen. It was not a collection agency calling this time. It was a burner number. He owed $90,000 to a shadow lender who did not bother sending polite final notice letters. They sent large, quiet men who waited patiently by his leased Porsche in the underground parking garage. His entire existence was a carefully constructed theater set built on quicksand. The exclusive country club memberships, the imported watches, the lavish backyard parties he hosted to impress people who did not actually care about him. All of it was funded by a mountain of toxic debt. The foundation was finally collapsing and threatening to bury him alive. He took a shaky breath and swiped away the threatening text message. His regional sales director salary barely covered the massive interest payments. He needed a massive cash injection, and he needed it yesterday. Desperation had driven him to commit the ultimate betrayal against the only person holding his fractured life together. His wife, Kendra, was a 34-year-old force of nature. As a proud African-American woman who had fought tooth and nail to climb the corporate ladder and become the director of human resources at a major national logistics firm, she was the absolute definition of self-made success. Kendra was incredibly sharp, highly analytical, and unfortunately unaware that her husband was a financial parasite. 3 weeks ago, Jason had crossed a line he could never uncross. He had forged her digital signature and bypassed the security protocols on her accounts. He had completely drained her 401k retirement fund, liquidating her hard-earned future to temporarily placate the loan sharks breathing down his neck. The heavy oak door of his office swung open with a violent push. Kendra stood in the doorway, her posture rigidly straight, clutching a thick stack of printed financial statements. Her dark eyes were narrowed with a terrifying, piercing clarity. Jason felt the blood completely drain from his face. She marched forward and tossed the papers directly onto his desk. The pages scattered, revealing bright yellow highlighted columns of missing funds. She demanded to know why her retirement portfolio was completely empty. She demanded an immediate explanation for the phantom transfers to offshore holding accounts she had just discovered. Kendra was a seasoned professional who dealt with corporate liars and manipulative employees for a living. She was not a woman who could be easily dismissed or silenced. She crossed her arms over her chest, her voice deadly calm, demanding the truth about the financial discrepancies that threatened their entire livelihood. Jason swallowed hard, his panicked mind racing to construct a plausible lie to save his own skin. He reached for the only fragile lifeline he had left. He pulled up the email he had just received from the executive assistant at Sinclair Biotech. He aggressively turned his computer monitor toward his wife. He painted a masterful illusion, his voice oozing with a fake, arrogant confidence. He told Kendra that he had single-handedly secured a private, closed-door meeting with the elusive tech billionaire, Dr. Sinclair. He lied effortlessly, looking directly into his wife's eyes, claiming the drained retirement funds were actually a strategic, silent investment required to buy into Sinclair Biotech's highly guarded distribution network. He promised her that this unprecedented partnership would multiply her retirement savings tenfold within a single fiscal quarter. When Kendra continued to press him on the blatant illegality of moving her money without explicit consent, Jason leaned heavily into the exact same manipulation tactics his parents had used to control his sister for decades. He scoffed loudly, adopting a deeply patronizing tone. He told her that this was simply how the upper echelon of corporate America operated behind closed doors. He gaslit her mercilessly, claiming her human resources background simply did not equip her to understand aggressive venture capital moves. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her tense shoulders, promising her a massive waterfront mansion and early retirement. He swore on his life that the Sinclair contract was an absolute, guaranteed certainty. Kendra remained fiercely skeptical. Her sharp professional intuition screamed that something was deeply and fundamentally wrong. But the official corporate email from Sinclair Biotech staring back at her from the glowing monitor provided just enough temporary validation to make her hesitate. She stepped out of his embrace and gave him exactly 1 week to prove his grand claims before she initiated a full forensic audit of their marital assets. The moment Kendra left the house for work, Jason slumped into his leather chair and exhaled a ragged, shaking breath. He had bought himself exactly 7 days to perform a miracle. He looked at the strict conditions set by the Sinclair CEO. He needed to present an aura of generational wealth and unshakable family stability. He grabbed his phone and dialed his parents. Brenda answered on the very first ring. Jason did not mention the crushing debt. He did not mention the stolen retirement funds or the fact that his wife was on the verge of uncovering his massive fraud. He simply announced that he had secured a private audience with the most powerful biomedical CEO on the West Coast. He told Brenda that Dr. Sinclair specifically requested a meeting with the core family members to verify their aristocratic standing before signing a multi-million-dollar exclusive contract. Brenda shrieked with absolute delight, the sound vibrating sharply through the phone speaker. She instantly validated Jason as the ultimate business prodigy of the family, praising his unmatched corporate brilliance just as she always had. She completely ignored the fact that they were all practically drowning in their own financial mismanagement. She declared that they must project an image of absolute, flawless perfection to secure the bag. Within the hour, Brenda was marching through the high-end boutiques of the city's most expensive shopping district. She ruthlessly swiped maxed-out credit cards and opened brand-new store installment plans to purchase thousands of dollars worth of designer dresses, pearl necklaces, and tailored suits. She was gleefully preparing to show off her supreme social status to the billionaire elite. She was entirely ready to flaunt her golden child's massive success, completely unaware that she was happily dressing up for her own execution. The dining room table groaned under the weight of an excessively lavish Thanksgiving feast. Brenda had insisted on hiring a high-end private catering company, determined to project an image of untouchable wealth to match the upcoming meeting with the Sinclair Biotech chief executive. Jason poured expensive imported wine into crystal glasses, performing the role of the triumphant corporate titan with sickening ease. Kendra sat quietly at the end of the long mahogany table, her sharp eyes missing absolutely nothing. As a seasoned human resources director, she was professionally trained to detect inconsistencies, micro-expressions, and hidden agendas. The atmosphere in her own home felt entirely fabricated. The cheerful banter between her husband and his parents rang hollow, masking a desperate, vibrating tension that Kendra could practically taste in the cold air. Her highly analytical mind kept circling back to the gaping holes in her husband's financial explanations, the drained retirement accounts, and the strange, unspoken voids in the family history. For 3 years of marriage, Kendra had observed a highly unusual dynamic. There was a glaring omission in every holiday gathering, every family photograph, and every childhood story. Kendra set her wine glass down with a deliberate, audible clink against the polished wood. The sudden sound temporarily halted Brenda's loud boasting about her newly purchased designer wardrobe. Kendra looked directly at her mother-in-law, maintaining a perfectly level, professional gaze. "So," Kendra asked, her voice calm but piercing through the dining room chatter, "where exactly is Camilla this year?" The reaction was instantaneous and highly revealing. Jason nearly choked on his expensive wine, coughing violently into his linen napkin. Richard rigidly dropped his silver fork onto his porcelain plate. Brenda's surgically smoothed face contorted into a mask of pure disgust. The synchronized, exaggerated physical responses confirmed Kendra's deepest suspicions. They were hiding something massive. "We do not speak of that ungrateful girl in this house," Brenda spat, waving her manicured hand dismissively as if swatting away a foul odor. "She is a total disgrace to the family name." Kendra leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her analytical mind shifting into high gear. "I have been married to Jason for 3 years," Kendra stated firmly. "I have never met her. I have never even seen a recent picture. What exactly did she do?" Richard leaned over the table, his face flushing with aggressive, patriarchal anger. "She was a complete failure," he growled. "She dropped out of college because she could not handle the academic pressure. She racked up tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt, buying useless garbage. When Jason kindly offered to help her find a low-level job, she repaid our generosity by stealing cash straight from my home office safe and running off with some deadbeat guy. She is a criminal and a failure." Jason quickly jumped into the conversation, desperate to reinforce the fabricated narrative. "She is toxic, Kendra," he added, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "She was deeply unstable and jealous of my success. We had to cut her off to protect our own mental health. Trust me, you never want to meet her." Kendra studied the three of them. Her professional training screamed that this was a coordinated, rehearsed lie. People who were truly victims of family theft displayed residual hurt or sorrow. Brenda, Richard, and Jason only displayed venomous contempt and defensive panic. Their story was too perfectly aligned, lacking the messy emotional nuances of a real family tragedy. However, Kendra knew better than to push a cornered liar. She needed hard evidence, not more defensive yelling. She offered a polite, understanding nod, effectively diffusing the immediate tension. She picked up her wine glass and smoothly steered the conversation toward Jason's upcoming meeting with Sinclair Biotech, watching them instantly relax and inflate with arrogant pride. The extravagant Thanksgiving dinner finally concluded hours later. Brenda and Richard drove back to their heavily mortgaged suburban house, leaving behind a massive mess for the catering staff to clean. Jason immediately retreated to his home office, claiming he needed to prepare strategy documents for the Sinclair meeting. Kendra knew he was likely pacing the floor, sweating over his shadow loans and the money he had stolen from her retirement fund. Seeking a moment of quiet solitude away from the suffocating fake luxury of the main floor, Kendra walked down the wooden stairs into the dimly lit, unfinished basement. She wanted to retrieve some winter storage bins to organize the guest room closets. The basement was a cluttered dumping ground for Jason's discarded hobbies and his parents' overflow storage. Kendra moved past rusty golf clubs and dusty holiday decorations. Tucked away in the darkest, dampest corner of the basement, shoved beneath a broken dehumidifier, she spotted a heavily taped cardboard box. The word trash was scrawled aggressively across the top flaps in Brenda's unmistakable, looping handwriting. Kendra felt a sudden, irresistible surge of curiosity. She grabbed a box cutter from a nearby workbench and sliced through the thick layers of packing tape. She pulled open the cardboard flaps, expecting to find old tax documents or broken kitchen appliances. Instead, the box was filled with heavy textbooks, neatly organized notebooks, and framed certificates that had been forcefully removed from their glass casings. Kendra reached into the box and pulled out a thick, leather-bound university yearbook. The cover bore the crest of a highly prestigious state university. She opened the heavy cover and flipped through the glossy pages. Tucked securely between the pages of the science department section, a loose, high-resolution photograph fluttered out and landed softly on the concrete floor. Kendra knelt down and picked up the photograph. It was a picture of a young woman radiating quiet, undeniable brilliance. The woman was wearing a heavy velvet doctoral gown, adorned with golden honors cords. Kendra turned the photograph over. Written on the back in neat, precise handwriting was a single line. Dr. Camilla, proudly defending her dissertation in biomedical science. Kendra felt her heart pound heavily against her ribs. She reached back into the discarded box and pulled out the crumpled certificates. They were not credit card debt notices. They were official university commendations for outstanding genetic research. They were academic grants awarded for exceptional scientific methodology. The narrative of the lazy, thieving college dropout shattered into a million irrecoverable pieces. Kendra stood up in the cold, damp basement, clutching the undeniable proof of Camilla's massive academic success. Her husband and his parents had not just lied to her, they had actively, maliciously assassinated the character of a highly accomplished female scientist to cover up their own financial exploitation. Kendra looked at the doctoral photograph again, her sharp mind connecting the dots with terrifying speed. A brilliant biomedical scientist named Camilla. A highly elusive tech billionaire running a biomedical empire named Sinclair. Kendra finally understood the lethal, brilliant trap her husband was blindly walking into. And she had absolutely no intention of warning him. Kendra was a woman of action. Finding a hidden box of academic achievements in a damp basement was enough to shatter the illusion of her husband's integrity. But it was not enough to protect her legal and financial future. She needed verifiable, concrete evidence. The very next morning, from the secure confines of her downtown human resources office, she bypassed her usual corporate channels and reached out to a highly recommended private investigator. This man specialized in untangling complex financial fraud and uncovering buried family histories. Kendra authorized a comprehensive background check on her husband, demanding a forensic accounting of his massive debts. She also handed over the single name she had found on the back of that graduation photograph. She instructed the investigator to dig into every public record, academic registry, and corporate filing associated with a Dr. Camilla. She paid the hefty retainer fee from an isolated bank account she had maintained since before her marriage, an account Jason had zero access to. The investigator promised a preliminary report within 5 business days. Kendra went back to her desk, maintaining her professional composure while a quiet fury simmered just beneath the surface. While Kendra was quietly building a legal fortress, Jason was spiraling into a state of absolute manic euphoria. 2 days after Thanksgiving, he burst through the front door of their suburban home, his eyes wide and his breathing ragged. He practically shoved his smartphone into Kendra's face. Glowing on the screen was a formal, highly professional email from the executive assistant at Sinclair Biotech. The elusive billionaire CEO had officially agreed to a face-to-face meeting. The email stipulated that the meeting would take place in a private VIP suite during the upcoming annual Biomedical Innovation Gala, the most prestigious networking event in the West Coast medical industry. Furthermore, the email explicitly reiterated the strict condition that Jason must bring his core family members to prove their deep-rooted stability and generational wealth. Jason did not interpret this highly unusual request as a massive red flag. His profound arrogance completely blinded him to the lethal trap closing around his ankles. Instead, he took it as ultimate validation of his fabricated social status. He believed his fake corporate bravado had successfully fooled a billionaire. He immediately began issuing frantic, aggressive orders. He told Kendra she needed to look like old money. He demanded she wear the breathtaking floor-length emerald silk gown she had purchased for a corporate awards banquet years ago. He insisted she book an appointment for a professional blowout and immaculate makeup. He needed her to play the role of the perfect, affluent trophy wife to sell the illusion. Jason then called his parents, whipping them into a sheer frenzy of unadulterated greed. Brenda shrieked through the phone, immediately taking another cash advance on a predatory loan to buy a sequined, excessively flashy designer gown that she could not afford. Richard dusted off a dated tuxedo, practicing his best wealthy patriarch handshake in the mirror. To complete the absurd theatrical production, Jason maxed out his final, hidden credit card to rent a massive, ridiculously ostentatious stretch limousine for the entire evening. He paced the living room, spinning wild, delusional tales of impending massive wealth. He proudly declared that their family was about to become strategic partners with a tech titan. He promised Brenda and Richard that by the end of the night, they would be swimming in Sinclair Biotech equity, forever cementing their superior status among their country club peers. The night of the gala arrived with a bitter, biting chill in the Seattle air. The rented limousine idled in the driveway, its overly long chassis looking entirely out of place in their standard suburban neighborhood. Kendra stepped into the vehicle, the emerald silk of her gown rustling softly. She looked absolutely flawless. A sharp, powerful African-American executive projecting an aura of quiet dominance. Jason slid in next to her, adjusting his tight bow tie, his forehead already slick with anxious sweat. Brenda and Richard were already waiting inside the plush leather cabin, popping a bottle of cheap champagne they had poured into expensive-looking crystal flutes. The drive to the downtown convention center was a suffocating display of familial delusion. Brenda loudly boasted about how she planned to redecorate her kitchen once the Sinclair money cleared. Richard bragged about how his brilliant son was finally taking his rightful place among the corporate elite. Jason fed their delusions, promising them private jets and vacation homes in the Hamptons. They clinked their glasses together, toasting to their own manufactured brilliance. They were a pack of ravenous wolves, completely convinced they were about to feast. Entirely unaware, they were being herded directly into a slaughterhouse. Kendra sat silently in the corner of the leather bench, her expression an impenetrable mask. She stared out the tinted window at the passing city lights, feeling a profound sense of physical nausea at the sheer, concentrated toxicity surrounding her. Then, her clutch vibrated. She opened her sleek purse and pulled out her phone. The screen displayed an incoming call from the private investigator. Kendra turned her body slightly away from her celebrating in-laws, covering the microphone with her hand. She answered the call in a hushed, urgent tone, pretending it was a last-minute human resources emergency from her office. The voice on the other end of the line was dead serious, completely devoid of any pleasantries. The investigator did not waste a single second. "Kendra, you need to pull up the property deed to the house currently in your name," the investigator stated, the words hitting her like physical blows. "Your husband forged your signature and took out a massive secondary mortgage on the property last month. The funds were immediately transferred to a shadow holding company to pay off aggressive gambling debts." Kendra felt the air leave her lungs, but her face remained perfectly composed. Her husband had not just stolen her retirement, he had legally jeopardized the very roof over her head. The investigator took a sharp breath before delivering the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. "And the background check you requested regarding the sister?" he continued, his tone dropping even lower. "I traced the academic records and followed the legal name change petition filed exactly 4 years ago. You are not going to believe who Camilla actually is. The tech billionaire your husband is desperately trying to impress tonight. The CEO of Sinclair Biotech is his discarded younger sister." The call disconnected. Kendra slowly lowered the phone to her lap. She looked up at her husband, who was currently laughing loudly at a joke his father had just made. She looked at her mother-in-law, who was adjusting her fake diamond necklace. Kendra gripped her phone so tightly, her knuckles turned a stark, ashen white. Her dark eyes flashed with an intense, unyielding fury. The perfect trap was fully set, and Kendra was more than ready to watch the steel jaws snap shut. The rented stretch limousine pulled up to the grand entrance of the downtown convention center. The annual Biomedical Innovation Gala was already in full swing. This was not a flashy Hollywood red carpet event. This was a gathering of apex predators in the medical industry. The wealth here was quiet, understated, and ruthlessly powerful. Men and women in bespoke, conservative formal wear moved with the quiet grace of people who actually controlled billions of dollars in global assets. Then, the doors of the obnoxious limousine swung open. Brenda stepped out first, her sequined designer gown catching the harsh security lights. She immediately snapped her fingers at a young valet, aggressively demanding he hold her umbrella higher so the slight drizzle would not ruin her freshly styled hair. Richard followed, aggressively adjusting his outdated tuxedo jacket. He loudly announced to the event coordinator at the door that they were the exclusive VIP guests of Sinclair Biotech. He practically shouted it, ensuring that at least 3 nearby groups of actual hospital administrators turned to stare. He complained loudly about the distance from the drop-off point to the entrance, acting as if walking 50 feet was an insult to his fabricated social standing. Jason emerged next, his face slick with a thin layer of anxious sweat. He tried to project the image of a conquering corporate titan, but his desperate, frantic energy was palpable. He barked orders at the driver to keep the engine running, a pathetic attempt to look important that only made him look foolish. Kendra stepped out last. In her flawless emerald silk gown, she looked exactly like the high-powered human resources executive she was. But as she walked a few paces behind her husband and his parents, a deep, twisting knot of revulsion formed in her stomach. She watched Brenda loudly complain about the quality of the complimentary champagne being offered on silver trays in the lobby. She watched Richard grab a passing waiter by the arm, condescendingly ordering him to fetch a top-tier scotch because the standard bar simply would not suffice for strategic partners of Dr. Sinclair. It was a masterclass in absolute delusion. Kendra kept her face perfectly neutral, but her sharp eyes were scanning the massive ballroom. Her professional instincts, honed over years of interviewing and firing corporate liars, were screaming. She observed the other medical distribution executives in the room. These were the true titans of the West Coast supply chain. They were standing in small, quiet clusters, sipping sparkling water and discussing actual corporate mergers. When they looked over at Jason and his loud, boasting parents, their eyes were filled with thinly veiled pity and sharp, aristocratic mockery. They recognized the stench of a drowning company desperately trying to fake buoyancy. Brenda and Richard were performing a grotesque pantomime of wealth, entirely oblivious to the fact that they were the laughingstock of the entire gala. Kendra felt a cold satisfaction settling deep into her bones. She touched the sleek clutch purse where her phone rested. She knew exactly who was waiting in the VIP suite. She knew exactly what her husband had stolen from her retirement fund. Watching them humiliate themselves publicly before the final execution was a rare, intoxicating kind of justice. She would not intervene. She would let them dig their own graves as deep as they possibly could. As they moved deeper into the main networking hall, the false bravado holding Jason together began to crack. He led his family toward the velvet-roped area outside the private executive suites. The reality of his situation suddenly crashed down on him. Standing near the entrance of the Sinclair Biotech VIP room were the chief executive officers of 3 massive national pharmaceutical logistics firms. These were corporations with thousands of employees and billions in verified annual revenue. They were waiting patiently, respectfully, hoping for just 5 minutes of Dr. Sinclair's time. Jason overheard them discussing complex supply chain logistics and genomic sequencing integration, terms he absolutely did not understand. Jason felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. His leased Porsche and his rented limousine meant absolutely nothing in this room. He was a small, indebted regional manager trying to play in a league of absolute giants. He tugged at his tight collar, his breathing growing shallow and erratic. His entire body hummed with the terrifying realization that he was vastly unqualified for this meeting. To overcompensate for his surging terror, Jason turned to his parents and began speaking entirely too loudly. He practically shouted that his company was the frontrunner for the exclusive contract. He boasted that Dr. Sinclair had specifically requested this intimate family meeting because she recognized their superior, established pedigree. Brenda eagerly took the bait. She clapped her hands together, her voice carrying over the gentle hum of the string quartet playing in the background. She loudly declared to no one in particular that she was already planning a massive kitchen renovation and a month-long European vacation the second the Sinclair money cleared their accounts. She laughed a high-pitched, grating laugh that caused several nearby investors to actively turn their backs and walk away in sheer second-hand embarrassment. Kendra stood silently beside them, her dark eyes completely devoid of warmth. She watched her husband frantically wipe his damp forehead with a cocktail napkin. She watched him check his luxury watch, the exact same watch he had bought using the money he extorted from his sister years ago. He was a dead man walking, clutching a fabricated resume, surrounded by the very parents who had enabled his toxic delusions his entire life. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany double doors of the VIP suite swung open. The low murmur of the surrounding crowd instantly hushed. An impeccably dressed executive assistant stepped out into the hallway. She held a sleek silver tablet in her hands, her posture radiating absolute authority. She scanned the crowd of waiting executives, her gaze completely bypassing the billionaires and national directors. She cleared her throat. "The representative for Jason's distribution firm, please," she announced, her voice crisp and echoing slightly in the sudden silence. "Dr. Sinclair is ready to see you and your core family members now." A shockwave of disbelief rippled through the gathered crowd of industry titans. They stared in absolute bewilderment as the name of a failing, mid-sized distribution company was called before theirs. Jason felt a massive, intoxicating rush of adrenaline completely override his panic. He believed he had actually won. He believed his fabricated image of old money and generational wealth had successfully fooled the most powerful woman in the room. He puffed out his chest, his arrogant smirk returning in full force. He aggressively adjusted his suit jacket and turned to his parents and his wife. He gestured for them to follow him, treating them like prized props in his grand theatrical production. "Follow my lead," Jason whispered fiercely to Brenda and Richard. "Let us show this billionaire exactly who we are." Kendra stepped forward, her emerald silk gown brushing the carpet. She looked at her husband with a completely unreadable expression. She was more than ready to show the billionaire exactly who they were. Jason confidently marched toward the heavy mahogany doors, pulling his heavily indebted parents and his betrayed wife right behind him, completely unaware that he was leading them directly into a blazing inferno. The heavy mahogany doors of the VIP suite sealed shut behind them with a thick, resonating thud that entirely blocked out the noise of the gala. The interior of the suite was a masterclass in intimidating corporate luxury. The lighting was low and dramatic, highlighting expensive modern art pieces and sleek architectural lines. At the far end of the cavernous room stood a massive desk carved from a single slab of black marble. Behind the desk, an imposing high-backed leather executive chair was turned entirely away from the door, facing the sprawling, rain-slicked Seattle skyline. Jason stepped onto the plush carpet, instantly puffing out his chest to project maximum dominance. He aggressively adjusted his tie and plastered on a sycophantic, incredibly fake smile. He cleared his throat loudly, adopting his most practiced, obnoxious corporate voice. "Good evening, Dr. Sinclair," Jason announced, his words dripping with desperate flattery. "I am Jason, the regional sales director we spoke about. I have brought my core family members tonight just as you requested. My father, Richard, my mother, Brenda, and my wife, Kendra. We are incredibly honored that you recognized our established pedigree and our generational wealth. We are absolutely ready to discuss a highly lucrative, exclusive partnership between our two great empires." The room remained completely, suffocatingly silent. Brenda stepped up right beside Jason, clutching a fresh crystal flute of champagne she had snagged from a passing waiter in the hallway. She puffed up her chest, eager to play the role of the wealthy matriarch. Richard stood tall, clasping his hands behind his back, ready to firmly shake hands with the billionaire who was about to save his son from bankruptcy. Kendra remained standing 2 paces behind them. Her beautiful emerald silk gown pooled around her feet. Her dark eyes were fixed intently on the back of that leather chair, her pulse pounding with the thrill of the impending execution. Slowly, with agonizing deliberation, the leather executive chair began to rotate. The smooth, mechanical sound of the swivel mechanism felt deafening in the quiet room. Jason leaned forward, his sycophantic smile stretching so wide it looked painful. Brenda held her breath, ready to unleash a barrage of calculated compliments. The chair completed its rotation. I sat perfectly still behind the black marble desk. I was wearing a sharply tailored, pristine white designer power suit that radiated absolute, undeniable authority. My hair was styled in a sleek, immaculate cut, and my posture was completely rigid. My face was an impenetrable mask of pure glacial ice. I looked absolutely nothing like the exhausted, desperate, debt-ridden student they had so casually discarded in a university parking lot 4 years ago. I looked like an apex predator who had just trapped her prey in a locked cage. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Brenda let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. Her eyes bulged out of her skull, her meticulously applied makeup suddenly looking like a clown mask over her ashen skin. All the strength vanished from her fingers. The crystal flute slipped directly through her grasp. It hit the polished marble floor with a violent, explosive crash. Shards of expensive glass and bubbling champagne violently splattered across the hem of her heavily financed designer gown. She did not even look down. She could not tear her horrified gaze away from my face. Richard physically recoiled, as if an invisible force had punched him squarely in the chest. He stumbled backward, his polished dress shoes slipping slightly on the spilled champagne. His mouth opened and closed silently, his brain entirely short-circuiting as it tried to process the impossible image in front of him. Jason lost every single drop of color in his face. His fake, spray-tanned skin turned a sickly, nauseating shade of gray. His sycophantic smile collapsed into a grotesque grimace of pure, unfiltered panic. His arrogant corporate facade completely disintegrated in a matter of seconds. His mind actively rejected the terrifying reality of the situation. He refused to believe that the billionaire tech titan he had been begging for a lifeline was the sister he had mercilessly exploited for beer money. "What are you doing here?" Jason stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical squeak. He pointed a violently shaking finger directly at my face. His panic instantly morphed into venomous, defensive rage. "How did you get in here? Are you working as a catering assistant? Are you pouring water for the executives?" I did not blink. I did not move a single muscle. I just stared at him with absolute, freezing contempt. Jason took a threatening step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. He was absolutely terrified that my mere presence would somehow ruin the imaginary multi-million-dollar deal he believed he was about to sign. "Get out of this suite, right now," he yelled, his voice echoing harshly off the glass walls. "You are going to ruin my career. I am here for a high-level executive meeting. Call your boss out here immediately. Go fetch Dr. Sinclair right this second, you worthless brat." Brenda finally found her voice, her tone shrill and trembling with aggressive indignation. "How dare you show your face and embarrass your brother at the most important moment of his life?" she shrieked, pointing her manicured finger at me. "Security is going to drag you out of here in handcuffs." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not even bother to stand up. I maintained my icy, unyielding eye contact with my brother. I calmly reached out and picked up a sleek silver remote control resting on the edge of my marble desk. Without breaking my gaze, I firmly pressed a single button. The entire wall behind me instantly came alive. A massive, state-of-the-art LED screen illuminated the dim room with a brilliant, blinding blue light. The sharp, high-definition glow washed over their terrified, pale faces. Displayed across the massive screen in giant, undeniable white block letters was the official corporate legal profile of the entire biomedical conglomerate. The text stretched from one end of the room to the other, leaving absolutely zero room for their pathetic delusions. Founder, Chief Executive Officer, and lead scientist, Dr. Camilla Sinclair. The absolute silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. The massive LED screen bathed the entire executive suite in a cold blue glow. It illuminated the absolute, unfiltered horror crashing across their faces. But the paralysis only lasted for a few agonizing seconds. Survival instinct is a terrifying thing, especially in people who lack a basic moral compass. I watched the exact moment Brenda decided to completely rewrite reality. The shock melted off her face, instantly replaced by a grotesque, theatrical display of maternal affection. She practically shoved past her paralyzed husband, her designer heels crunching loudly over the shattered crystal and spilled champagne on the polished marble floor. She threw her arms open wide, her face contorting into an expression of profound, tearful joy. "Oh, my darling daughter!" Brenda cried out, her voice echoing with a sickeningly sweet vibrato. She rushed toward my desk, wiping away entirely imaginary tears from her perfectly made-up eyes. "I knew it. I just knew you would make it to the top. I have always been so incredibly proud of you, Camilla. We have missed you so much." Richard snapped out of his stunned trance the moment Brenda spoke. He immediately straightened his posture. He nodded enthusiastically, stepping forward with a broad, arrogant smile, as if my billionaire status was a direct result of his excellent parenting. He clapped his hands together. "Look at this office!" Richard boomed, his loud voice echoing off the glass walls. "Only a true Sinclair could build an empire like this. You are the absolute pride of this family." Jason was the last to recover from the shock, but when he did, his pivot was the most stomach-churning of them all. The gray pallor vanished from his sweaty skin, quickly replaced by the slick, greasy confidence of a desperate salesman who thought he had just won the lottery. He genuinely believed that the shared DNA flowing through our veins would magically erase years of severe financial and emotional abuse. He marched right up to my desk. He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, heavily branded folder containing the exclusive distribution contract. He slid it directly across the pristine surface toward me. "You really had us going there for a second, little sister," Jason chuckled, his voice dripping with fake, fraternal warmth. "This is an incredible prank. But you see, blood is thicker than water. I always knew you had my back. Just sign this exclusive contract for your big brother right now. We can keep all this massive wealth right here inside the family, exactly where it belongs. We are family, after all." I did not reach for the contract. I did not even look at the desperately shoved paperwork. I simply leaned back in my high-backed leather chair and crossed my arms over my chest. I looked at the three of them with an expression of absolute, unadulterated contempt. The sheer audacity of their gaslighting was truly a marvel of human psychology. They were perfectly willing to erase 4 years of complete abandonment just to access my bank accounts. I let the heavy silence stretch out, forcing them to squirm under my freezing gaze. Then, a sharp, humorless smirk touched the corner of my lips. "Family," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the lethal weight of a loaded gun. "You must be terribly mistaken." Jason frowned, his fake smile faltering slightly. "Come on, Camilla, stop playing around. The board of directors is waiting for this paperwork." "I am not playing around," I replied, maintaining unbroken, terrifying eye contact with my mother. "I cannot possibly be your daughter. Because your Camilla is a completely worthless college dropout. Your Camilla maxed out her credit cards buying useless garbage. Your Camilla is a pathetic criminal who stole cash directly from her father's home office safe and ran away with a deadbeat guy. Is that not the exact story you have been selling to everyone who asks?" The air in the VIP suite instantly turned to solid ice. Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her throat as if she had been physically struck. Richard took a sudden, sharp step backward, the fake pride draining from his posture. Jason stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, his jaw dropping open in utter disbelief. They had no idea how I knew those exact, specific lies. They had no idea I was accurately quoting the very narrative they had spun to hide their own crimes. But there was one person in the room who recognized every single word. Kendra had been standing silently near the heavy mahogany doors, her posture rigid, her sharp mind processing the explosive collision of lies and reality. When I repeated the exact defamatory phrases her in-laws had used during that Thanksgiving dinner, the final pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into place. The private investigator's report she had received in the limousine confirmed my identity and my massive academic success. Now she was hearing the irrefutable proof of their malicious, coordinated character assassination directly from the source. They had tried to destroy my reputation, to cover up the fact that Jason was a financial parasite. Kendra did not gasp. She did not yell. The high-powered human resources director simply went completely still, her dark eyes flashing with a terrifying, righteous fury. She realized she was standing in a room with 3 pathological liars who had endangered her entire livelihood. With slow, deliberate, and fiercely cold precision, Kendra stepped forward. Her emerald silk gown rustled loudly in the dead silence of the executive suite. She walked right past her deeply panicked, sweating husband, intentionally using her shoulder to forcefully shove him aside. She positioned herself directly between Jason and my black marble desk, physically blocking him from my sightline. She did not look at her husband. She did not look at her father-in-law. Kendra turned her elegant head slowly, fixing her piercing, furious gaze directly into her mother-in-law's terrified eyes. She was completely ready to violently tear their entire fabricated existence apart, forever. Kendra stood perfectly still, her emerald silk gown casting a vibrant reflection against the polished marble floor. Her dark eyes, usually warm and observant, were now 2 obsidian daggers aimed directly at her mother-in-law. The silence in the VIP suite was absolute, heavy with the suffocating weight of 3 years of relentless deception. Kendra did not blink. She let the agonizing quiet stretch, forcing Brenda to wither under her relentless scrutiny. Brenda opened her mouth, her lips trembling, but no sound came out. The fake, aristocratic persona she had so carefully curated for this gala had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, grasping woman who had just been caught in a monstrous, unforgivable lie. "You sat at my Thanksgiving table," Kendra began, her voice dropping to a dangerously low, resonant register. "You sat in my dining room, drank my wine, and looked me dead in the eyes. You told me your daughter was a useless, heavily indebted college dropout. You explicitly stated she was a pathological thief who stole money from your home safe and ran away to live in squalor." Brenda took a shaky step backward, her designer heels slipping slightly on the champagne-soaked marble. She raised her manicured hands in a pathetic, defensive gesture. "Kendra, please," Brenda stammered, her voice shrill and desperate. "You do not understand the entire context of our complex family history. We were simply trying to protect you from her negative influence. We wanted to spare you the emotional burden." "Protect me," Kendra repeated, her tone dripping with pure, unadulterated acid. "You lied to my face for 3 consecutive years. You fabricated an entire fictional universe to cover up your own profound failures as parents. You deliberately assassinated the character of a highly successful biomedical scientist just to protect the fragile ego of the pathetic man standing behind me." Jason suddenly snapped out of his paralyzed state. The terrifying realization that his wife was actively destroying his imaginary multi-million-dollar partnership finally jolted his brain into panic mode. He lunged forward, his face flushed with a furious, desperate shade of crimson. He reached out and aggressively grabbed Kendra by the upper arm, his fingers digging into the emerald silk of her gown. "Shut your mouth right now," Jason hissed, his voice a frantic, aggressive whisper. He tried to physically pull her away from the black marble desk, his eyes darting nervously toward me, as if I might suddenly snatch the distribution contract away. "You are making an absolute scene in front of the most important business partner of my entire career. Do not ruin this deal for me. We can discuss your insane conspiracy theories when we get back to the house. Apologize to Dr. Sinclair and step back." Kendra did not step back. She did not apologize. She completely transformed into a force of nature. With a swift, powerful, and impeccably trained motion, Kendra violently wrenched her arm out of his aggressive grip. She swatted his hand away with such intense force that Jason physically stumbled sideways, nearly crashing into his terrified father. "Do not ever touch me again, you absolute fraud," Kendra commanded, her voice echoing off the glass walls with earth-shattering authority. She turned her entire body to face her husband, stepping directly into his personal space. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger squarely at the center of his chest. "Do not stand here and lecture me about making a scene. You are a pathological liar and a financial parasite." Jason raised his hands, a nervous, patronizing smile twitching on his sweaty face. "Kendra, sweetheart, you are clearly overreacting to a simple family misunderstanding." "Overreacting?" Kendra laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that chilled the air in the room. "I hired a private investigator yesterday morning. I know exactly what you did, Jason. I know you illegally bypassed the security protocols on my financial accounts. You completely drained my 401k retirement fund. You stole every single cent I have worked for over the past 10 years. Richard gasped loudly, his hand flying to his chest. Brenda let out a horrified squeak, her eyes darting wildly between her golden boy and her furious daughter-in-law. "But that was not enough for you, was it?" Kendra continued, relentlessly backing Jason into the corner of the room. "You needed more cash to fund your pathetic, delusional lifestyle. So you committed felony fraud. You forged my signature on a secondary mortgage application. You leveraged the beautiful suburban house that I purchased with my own hard-earned money entirely before our marriage even began. You risked my entire financial livelihood to pay off aggressive shadow loans and cover your massive, unpayable underground gambling debts because you are nothing but a coward." Jason shrank against the glass wall, his face completely devoid of color. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. He looked desperately toward his parents for a lifeline, expecting them to rush to his defense, just as they had done his entire life. But Brenda and Richard were completely frozen in absolute horror. The flawless, successful son they had worshipped and funded for 36 years was suddenly exposed as a desperate, thieving criminal. Their golden child had not just failed, he had actively stolen from his own wife. The pristine VIP suite instantly devolved into absolute, unprecedented chaos. Brenda began screaming hysterically, her voice reaching an ear-splitting pitch, aggressively slapping Jason on the shoulder and demanding to know where all their borrowed money had actually gone. Richard shouted over her, wildly accusing Kendra of fabricating the private investigator report to ruin his son's impeccable reputation. Jason yelled back at both of them, his voice cracking with sheer panic, blaming his parents for not giving him enough financial support to survive the fiscal quarter. The three of them stood in the center of the luxurious room, viciously tearing each other apart, completely dropping their affluent masks to reveal the toxic, greedy predators hiding underneath. I sat quietly behind my black marble desk, watching the spectacular, fiery destruction of my biological family. I allowed them to scream and point fingers for a few deeply satisfying moments. I watched their entire fabricated universe burn to the ground in real time. Then, I decided the theatrical performance was officially over. I stood up slowly, my white designer suit projecting absolute dominance. I reached down and picked up a massive, thick stack of legally binding corporate foreclosure documents that my attorneys had prepared that exact morning. I raised the heavy stack of papers high into the air. With a sudden, violent downward motion, I slammed the entire stack directly onto the polished glass surface of my desk. The explosive, thunderous crack echoed through the cavernous suite like a gunshot. The screaming stopped instantly. Brenda, Richard, and Jason froze in place, their heads snapping toward me in terrified unison. The heavy silence rushed back into the room, thick and suffocating. I leaned forward, resting my hands firmly on the stack of documents, my eyes locking onto my trembling, defeated brother. "A contract?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet air with the chilling precision of a steel blade. "Do you actually think I called you all here today to sign a contract?" I pushed the stack of corporate documents across the smooth glass surface of my marble desk. The heavy thud hung in the cold air of the VIP suite, a physical manifestation of their impending doom. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at my brother. My eyes were fixed solely and intensely on Kendra. She was the only person in this room who operated in reality, and she deserved to see the absolute, unfiltered truth of the man she had married. I separated a thick black folder from the top of the pile and slid it directly toward her edge of the desk. "Take a very close look at page 4, I instructed, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "That is a forensic financial audit of your husband's distribution company. I had my acquisition team run a deep background check on their corporate accounts last week. It details exactly why his branch has been bleeding capital for the past 4 years. Kendra stepped forward, her emerald gown brushing softly against the floor. She picked up the heavy folder with steady hands, her professional human resources training kicking into high gear. She flipped directly to the 4th page. Her dark eyes scanned the highlighted columns of numbers, absorbing the financial devastation. Jason let out a strangled, desperate gasp. He lunged forward, frantically trying to snatch the folder out of her hands, but Kendra swiftly stepped back, holding the damning documents far out of his reach. "You told your wife you were a highly successful regional director," I said, addressing Jason but keeping my gaze locked on Kendra. "You told our parents you were a business prodigy, heading for the corporate stratosphere. But the numbers do not lie. 4 years ago, on the exact same day I successfully defended my doctoral dissertation, you bought a brand new luxury Porsche. You proudly claimed it was the reward for a massive record-breaking sales quarter. Kendra, look at the asset diversion column on that page. Jason did not earn a corporate bonus. He embezzled company funds directly from his own employer to cover the massive down payment and the first year of lease installments for that car. He has been systematically cooking the company books ever since to hide the massive deficit from the corporate auditors." Kendra read the lines of financial data, her beautiful face hardening into a mask of pure, absolute disgust. The puzzle was finally complete. The shadow loans, the drained retirement accounts, the remortgaged house. It was all a frantic, chaotic attempt to cover up a major federal crime before the corporate overlords caught on. He was not just a terrible, manipulative husband. He was a white-collar criminal who had built his entire adult existence on stolen money. Jason collapsed against the glass wall of the executive suite. His legs gave out completely under the crushing weight of the truth. He slid down to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest like a frightened, cornered child. He was hyperventilating, his expensive designer suit wrinkling around his violently trembling frame. The arrogant facade was entirely destroyed. He was completely exposed. There was no charming smile left to save him, no fake promises that could erase the hard evidence resting securely in his wife's hands. The sheer magnitude of Jason's crimes should have been enough to silence any normal parents. It should have elicited profound horror, or at least deep, undeniable disappointment. But Richard and Brenda were not normal parents. They were emotional parasites who had attached their entire identity to their golden child. When faced with the undeniable proof of his catastrophic criminal failures, they did not hold him accountable. They turned their venom entirely on me. Richard marched right up to my desk, his face contorted into a mask of aggressive patriarchal rage. He slammed his fist heavily down on the marble surface, completely ignoring the fact that he was standing inside my multi-billion-dollar corporate empire. "Listen to me right now," Richard commanded, his voice booming with toxic, demanding authority. "You have money. You clearly have billions of dollars at your disposal. You are going to write a check and wipe out your brother's debts today. He is the eldest son of this family. He carries the family name. You carry the blood of this house in your veins, Camilla. You have a strict, undeniable responsibility to protect your brother from ruin. You will not sit there in your fancy white suit and let him go to federal prison. You will fix this immediately." Brenda instantly joined the assault, deploying the exact same emotional manipulation she had used to control me since early childhood. She threw herself onto the floor next to Jason, wrapping her arms tightly around his trembling shoulders. She wailed loudly, a theatrical, piercing sound designed to inflict maximum psychological guilt. "How can you be so incredibly heartless?" Brenda screamed, her face streaked with ruined running makeup. "He is your own flesh and blood. We sacrificed everything to raise you. We gave you a home. We gave you a life. And now you sit in your glass tower judging us. Do you want to see me die of a broken heart? Will you only be satisfied when I am buried deep in the ground? You are a monster. You are deliberately trying to destroy the only family you have ever known. The barrage of heavy guilt trips, the aggressive screaming, the ridiculous demands for unearned loyalty. It was the exact same tired script they had used to break me down for over 3 decades. They fully expected me to cave under the heavy emotional pressure. They expected the obedient, approval-seeking daughter to miraculously emerge from the ashes and blindly hand over her hard-earned fortune to save the golden child from his own criminal actions. I looked at Richard's demanding, entitled face. I looked at Brenda weeping dramatically on the floor, clinging to her criminal son. I looked at Jason, the pathetic thief cowering in the corner of my office. I felt the absolute stunning absurdity of the situation wash over me like a tidal wave. I threw my head back and I laughed. I laughed loud, hard, and uncontrollably. The sound was bright, sharp, and completely devoid of any warmth or affection. It echoed loudly off the high ceiling of the VIP suite, slicing right through Brenda's fake theatrical sobs and Richard's aggressive posturing. My laughter instantly paralyzed them. They stared at me in utter bewilderment. They had never seen me react to their toxic abuse with sheer, unadulterated amusement. I stopped laughing and leaned forward, resting my elbows firmly on the polished glass. "You genuinely believe I am part of your family," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet whisper that commanded absolute attention. "You actually think you have the legal or moral right to demand my money because of shared blood?" I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored white blazer. I slowly pulled out a single, neatly folded sheet of heavy legal paper. I placed it gently on the exact center of the desk. The bright overhead lights perfectly caught the vivid, raised red seal of the state government stamped squarely at the bottom of the official document. I kept my hand resting firmly beside the official document on the polished glass. Richard leaned forward aggressively, his eyes squinting to read the bold print stamped across the top of the heavy legal paper. He reached out a trembling hand to snatch it away, but I was faster. I picked up the paper and held it directly in front of his flushed, angry face. The bright overhead lights perfectly illuminated the raised state seal. "I do not carry your last name," I stated, my voice echoing through the massive executive suite with absolute, chilling finality. "The obedient daughter you are trying to command right now does not exist. Legally, biologically, and emotionally, that woman was killed by all of you the very day she stood waiting in that university parking lot, holding a bouquet of cheap roses. You chose a backyard barbecue over her entire existence. You chose to celebrate a leased sports car instead of acknowledging my doctorate. So I buried her. I erased her from the public record. I am Dr. Sinclair. I have no father. I have no mother. I have no brother. I owe you absolutely nothing." Richard stared blindly at the official decree of my legal name change. His jaw worked silently up and down, but no sound came out. The arrogant patriarch who had controlled our household with an iron fist suddenly looked incredibly small, ancient, and entirely powerless. The terrifying realization that his bloodline argument held zero legal or emotional weight finally penetrated his thick skull. Brenda stopped her theatrical, manipulative sobbing on the floor. The fake tears instantly dried up on her heavily powdered cheeks. She looked up at me with genuine, unadulterated terror. She finally understood that her favorite weapon of maternal guilt had been permanently neutralized. There were no more emotional buttons left to push. But I was not finished. The true execution had not even begun. I turned my attention entirely away from my former parents. I locked my eyes onto Jason. He was still cowering near the glass wall, sweating profusely in his ruined designer suit, desperate for a way out. I picked up the silver remote control resting on my desk. I pressed a different button. The massive LED screen behind me instantly shifted from my corporate biography to a complex, highly detailed financial flowchart. At the very top of the chart was the unmistakable, dominating logo of Sinclair Biotech. Directly beneath it, connected by a thick green line indicating total corporate ownership, was the logo of the medical supply distribution company where Jason currently worked. Did you honestly believe a multi-billion-dollar biomedical conglomerate would invite a failing, debt-ridden regional sales director to a VIP suite just to sign a simple distribution contract? I asked, my voice ringing with lethal, cold amusement. You always were incredibly short-sighted, Jason. You only ever saw what was directly in front of your face. You cared about the flashy suits and the expensive watches, but you never bothered to look at the larger picture. I stood up from my high-backed executive chair and walked slowly around the heavy marble desk. The sharp, rhythmic click of my designer heels against the polished floor sounded exactly like a ticking countdown clock. I stopped just a few feet away from his trembling form. Kendra stood completely still in the background, her arms crossed over her emerald gown, watching her husband face his ultimate reckoning with silent, fierce approval. This is the real reason I called you here today, Jason, I continued, my gaze pinning him to the spot. I did not want to partner with your pathetic, sinking ship of a company. I wanted to own it. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, Sinclair Biotech has officially completed a hostile corporate takeover. We bought out your major creditors. We acquired a controlling stake in the corporate shares. We completely absorbed your entire distribution network into our supply chain. Jason stared at the glowing LED screen in pure horror. His mouth hung open. The blood rushing in his ears must have been deafening. I let the absolute devastation of the situation wash over him before I delivered the final, fatal strike. That means I am officially the chairman of your board of directors, I declared, savoring the weight of every single syllable. I am your ultimate superior. I own the building you work in. I own the desk you sit at. I sign your paychecks. And my very first official act as the new owner of your company is to terminate your employment. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at his chest. You are hereby fired, Jason. You are terminated immediately for gross misconduct, severe breach of fiduciary duty, and extensive corporate embezzlement. You do not get a severance package. You do not get to clear out your desk. You are completely finished in the medical supply industry. No reputable company will ever hire you again once this news goes public. Brenda let out a sharp, strangled gasp, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. Richard gripped the edge of my marble desk to keep his knees from buckling. But the avalanche of consequences was still falling heavily upon them. And because Sinclair Biotech maintains a strict, unyielding, zero-tolerance policy for corporate theft, I added, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper, I have already instructed my legal department to compile a comprehensive dossier of your fraudulent activities. Every falsified sales report, every illegally diverted company fund used to pay for your luxury cars, and every shadow ledger you created has been thoroughly documented. At this exact moment, my attorneys are actively forwarding your entire employment file directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are going to federal prison for a very long time. The color completely vanished from Jason's face. He looked exactly like a reanimated corpse. His knees violently buckled beneath him, completely unable to support his own weight. The last fragile shred of his arrogant, phony pride shattered into microscopic dust. He collapsed entirely, hitting the hard marble floor with a heavy, defeated thud. He curled into a pathetic, trembling ball, wrapping his arms tightly around his head. "Please," Jason sobbed, his voice breaking into a high, hysterical whine. "Please, Camilla, do not do this to me. I will pay it back. I swear to God, I will pay back every single cent. I will sell the cars. I will sell the house. Just do not send me to prison. Please have mercy on me." He was literally begging on his knees, weeping loudly like a frightened, desperate child. The golden boy, the untouchable pride and joy of the family, was currently reduced to a blubbering, broken mess on my office floor. She simply observed the pathetic, weeping man curled on the polished marble floor and felt a profound, absolute sense of liberation. The suffocating illusion she had been trapped inside for 3 years was completely shattered. Jason was still sobbing, clutching at the empty air, begging for a financial miracle that would never arrive. Kendra slowly stepped forward. The rustle of her emerald silk gown cut through his pathetic whining. She walked directly toward him, her dark eyes blazing with an intense, righteous fire. She looked down at the man who had drained her retirement fund, mortgaged her property, and lied to her face every single day of their marriage. She raised her left hand. The bright overhead lights caught the massive, glittering stone of her engagement ring. Jason had bragged endlessly about this ring. He had paraded it around country clubs and family dinners, loudly proclaiming it was a flawless, custom-cut diamond purchased with his massive corporate bonuses. He had used it as the ultimate symbol of his fabricated success. Kendra gripped the metal band and pulled it off her finger in one smooth, decisive motion. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, looking at the sparkling stone with pure disgust. "I had this appraised yesterday morning after my private investigator called me," Kendra stated, her voice slicing through the heavy air like a perfectly sharpened blade. "You swore on your life this was a $30,000 diamond. The jeweler laughed in my face. It is cubic zirconia. It is entirely synthetic. A cheap, worthless piece of glass set in hollow metal. It is the exact, perfect, physical manifestation of you and your entire pathetic family." Jason looked up, his tear-streaked face twisting in fresh horror. "Kendra, please," he choked out, reaching a trembling hand toward her. "Do not do this right now. We can fix this. I love you. Do not ever speak the word love to me," Kendra commanded, her tone dropping to a dangerous, vibrating frequency. She leaned down slightly, ensuring her words struck him directly in the chest. "I am a Black woman who built an entire career from the absolute ground up. I worked relentlessly for every single dollar, every promotion, and every piece of property I own. I fought through corporate ceilings you could not even comprehend. I will not let a bunch of fake, rotten people drag me down into the mud." With a swift, aggressive flick of her wrist, Kendra threw the fake diamond ring directly at his face. The heavy metal band struck Jason squarely on the cheekbone with a sharp smack before bouncing off and clattering loudly across the marble floor. He recoiled, pressing a hand to his face, letting out a pathetic whimper. Kendra did not spare him another second of her time. She straightened her posture, pulling her shoulders back, radiating an aura of total, untouchable dignity. She turned her body completely away from the weeping mess on the floor and faced my desk. The intense, burning fury in her eyes instantly vanished as she looked at me. It was replaced by an expression of deep, professional respect and profound gratitude. She was looking at an equal. She was looking at the woman who had finally handed her the key to her own cage. "Thank you for showing me the absolute truth today, Dr. Sinclair," Kendra said, her voice steady, clear, and perfectly composed. "You have done me an incredible favor. My lawyer will deal with him." I gave her a single firm nod of acknowledgement. "You are very welcome." Kendra did not look back. She turned on her heel, her emerald gown sweeping majestically across the floor. She marched directly to the heavy mahogany doors, pulled them open, and walked out of the VIP suite. The doors swung shut behind her with a heavy, resonant thud. The sound finalized the absolute end of Jason's marriage and the complete loss of his primary financial victim. The sudden departure of the only other sane person in the room seemed to trigger a frantic, desperate reaction in Brenda. Her primary target for financial salvation had just walked out the door. The terrifying reality that they were now entirely isolated, facing a multi-billion-dollar CEO they had ruthlessly abused, finally broke her brain. She reverted to the only manipulation tactic she had left in her arsenal. Brenda let out a sudden, high-pitched wail, throwing her hands up toward the ceiling. "I cannot breathe!" she shrieked, clutching her chest theatrically. "My heart is failing! The stress is killing me!" She closed her eyes and aggressively threw herself backward, aiming for the plush carpet, entirely expecting Richard or Jason to immediately leap forward and catch her. She expected the room to halt in a state of sudden, terrified panic over her medical emergency. But Jason was too busy sobbing into his hands, entirely consumed by his own impending federal indictment. Richard was still standing, paralyzed by the desk, his mind completely shattered by the total loss of his patriarchal authority. He did not move a single inch. Brenda hit the floor, hard. There was a loud, ungraceful thud as her shoulder and hip collided with the solid marble beneath the thin carpet. The impact knocked the wind out of her lungs, for real. She lay there, her eyes flying open in genuine shock, staring up at the ceiling. No one was rushing to her side. No one was screaming for a doctor. Her ultimate theatrical performance had failed spectacularly. The heavy, humiliating realization washed over her. She was entirely powerless. I sat behind my desk, watching the pathetic scene unfold with absolute, freezing detachment. A grown man weeping over his crimes, a patriarch rendered entirely mute, and a matriarch faking a medical emergency on the floor. It was a tragic, ugly portrait of a family that had entirely destroyed itself through greed and profound cruelty. I had seen enough. The execution was complete. The toxicity had been neutralized. It was time to clear out the garbage. I reached across the pristine glass surface of my desk and picked up the heavy black intercom radio reserved exclusively for executive security protocols. I pressed the communication button, holding the device close to my mouth. My eyes remained locked on the trembling, defeated figures scattered across my office floor. "Security Command," I said, my voice echoing coldly through the spacious room, projecting absolute authority without a single trace of emotion. "I need an extraction team dispatched to the main executive VIP suite immediately. I have 3 unauthorized, illegal trespassers currently refusing to vacate my private corporate property." Escort them out of the building. I released the button for a fraction of a second, watching Jason's eyes widen in sheer terror as the reality of a physical eviction dawned on him. I pressed the button again, delivering the final, fatal command. "If they resist your instructions in any capacity," I commanded smoothly into the radio, "do not hesitate. Call the police and press formal trespassing charges." The swift removal from the VIP suite marked the absolute, definitive end of their reign. I did not have to lift another finger or dirty my hands with their pathetic downfall. Natural consequences swept through their lives like a devastating, inescapable hurricane. Less than 48 hours after my private security team physically escorted them out of the convention center, federal agents walked into the regional distribution office. It was the very office building my biomedical conglomerate now fully owned and operated. The federal agents carried thick, heavily documented arrest warrants detailing massive corporate embezzlement, severe wire fraud, and grand larceny. Jason was forcefully handcuffed right in the middle of the sales floor, paraded in front of his remaining shocked staff members. His fake, flashy designer watch was immediately confiscated by the authorities as evidence of his illicit spending. I watched the brief local news segment from the quiet comfort of my penthouse, sipping black coffee as the morning sun illuminated the Seattle skyline. The golden child, the arrogant man who had leached off my survival wages for years, was wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit and staring blankly at a concrete floor. The justice was poetic, absolute, and entirely self-inflicted. He had built a fragile, precarious house of cards fueled by greed and delusion, and I had simply opened the window to let the wind blow it down. Kendra executed her own flawless, ruthless retaliation. She did not shed a single tear of hesitation or regret. The morning after the gala, she filed for an aggressive, heavily contested divorce, citing extreme financial infidelity and irreconcilable differences. She did not have to fight blindly in the dark against his manipulative lies. Before she left the venue that night, I had my legal team securely transfer the entire black folder of forensic financial evidence directly to her private attorney. Armed with irrefutable, ironclad proof of his shadow loans, offshore accounts, and forged signatures, Kendra completely annihilated Jason in family court. The presiding judge was absolutely disgusted by his brazen financial abuse and blatant theft of marital assets. Kendra successfully secured a ruling that forced the immediate liquidation of Jason's remaining hidden assets to replenish her stolen retirement fund. Furthermore, she retained full, undisputed ownership of the beautiful suburban house she had purchased with her own hard-earned money prior to their toxic marriage. She legally and surgically expelled him from her life, walking away from the wreckage as a triumphant, vindicated woman who had fiercely protected her own empire. With their golden son facing a decade in a federal penitentiary, Brenda and Richard completely panicked. Their entire identity and social standing were aggressively tied to his fabricated success. To keep their precious boy from serving a maximum sentence in a high-security facility, they hired a team of ruthless, exorbitantly expensive criminal defense attorneys. The massive legal retainer fees instantly vaporized their remaining life savings. The mountain of secondary debt Jason had accumulated swallowed them whole, dragging them down into a financial abyss. Within 4 months, the bank ruthlessly foreclosed on their sprawling suburban mansion. The pristine house with the manicured lawn, the very place where they had hosted countless backyard barbecues funded by my stolen money, was auctioned off to the highest bidder. Richard and Brenda were forced to pack their diminished, pathetic belongings into cheap garbage bags. They moved into a cramped, dilapidated one-bedroom apartment on the absolute worst side of the city. The walls were paper-thin, the plumbing constantly leaked, and the harsh reality of deep, inescapable poverty finally became their permanent daily existence. They had eagerly sacrificed their brilliant daughter to fund a criminal, and now they were paying the ultimate, agonizing price for their extreme favoritism. The financial ruin was devastating, but the total social annihilation was what truly broke Brenda's vain spirit. Kendra was not content with merely winning in a court of law. She wanted the court of public opinion to know exactly who these terrible people were. Kendra drafted a meticulously detailed, highly articulate post on her professional social media networks. She exposed the absolute truth about her fraudulent ex-husband and his enabling, deeply cruel parents. She described in vivid, heartbreaking detail how Brenda and Richard had deliberately abandoned their own daughter on the day she received her doctorate in biomedical science, choosing instead to eat grilled meat and celebrate a leased sports car. The post went massively viral within their local community. The affluent country club friends who had once attended Brenda's lavish parties instantly severed all ties, terrified by the association. Extended family members blocked their numbers, entirely disgusted by the sheer, staggering level of parental neglect and financial exploitation. Brenda and Richard became absolute pariahs, completely shunned by the very high society they had worshipped their entire lives. They were left with absolutely no one to manipulate and no one to impress. Trapped in a freezing, miserable apartment with a husband who bitterly refused to speak to her and a son locked in a federal holding cell, Brenda finally hit rock bottom. Her overwhelming arrogance fractured into pure, desperate, suffocating panic. The crushing weight of her consequences finally destroyed her fragile ego. She picked up her cheap prepaid mobile phone with trembling fingers. She dialed the main corporate switchboard for Sinclair Biotech, fully intending to beg, cry, and grovel for financial mercy from the daughter she had so callously thrown away. The line clicked, signaling a connection. She opened her mouth to unleash a torrent of theatrical, manipulative apologies, but a cold, automated voice immediately cut her off. The robotic voice stated clearly that her phone number was permanently restricted under an active, legally binding cease and desist mandate. The system automatically terminated the connection, leaving Brenda listening to nothing but a harsh, hollow dial tone in a dark, empty room. 6 months passed since the devastating collapse of the family that tried to bury me. The brutal, freezing Seattle winter had completely melted away, surrendering to a bright and exceptionally clear spring morning. I stood in the exact center of my immaculate corner office, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a totally unobstructed, panoramic view of the sparkling city skyline and the deep blue waters of the bay. I took a slow, deep sip of the bitter coffee, letting the absolute, profound silence of my sanctuary wash over me. There were no frantic phone calls demanding my hard-earned money. There were no manipulative text messages telling me I was a profound disappointment. There was only the quiet, rhythmic hum of a multi-billion-dollar biomedical empire operating at peak, ruthless efficiency. I had successfully amputated the diseased branches of my biological family tree, and the resulting peace was the greatest luxury my wealth could ever buy. The heavy oak door of my executive suite swung open with a crisp, professional click. I did not turn around immediately. I knew exactly who had the highly restricted security clearance to enter my office unannounced. The sharp, confident sound of designer heels striking the polished marble floor echoed through the spacious room. I slowly turned away from the breathtaking view of the city and smiled. Kendra walked toward my black marble desk, looking absolutely magnificent. The heavy, suffocating weight of her toxic marriage to my fraudulent brother was entirely gone. She was no longer the tense, suspicious woman trapped in a suburban house built on stolen money and massive lies. Today, she wore a sharply tailored, deep burgundy power suit that perfectly complemented her skin tone and radiated an aura of pure, undeniable corporate authority. Her dark eyes were bright, focused, and completely alive with ambitious energy. She looked exactly like the fiercely intelligent, self-made executive she had always been, entirely unburdened by the parasitic family that had desperately tried to drag her down into their pathetic financial mud. When the dust had finally settled from Jason's federal indictment and the subsequent foreclosure of my parents' house, I made a highly calculated, strategic business decision. I did not reach out to Kendra out of some misplaced sense of familial pity. Pity is entirely useless in the corporate world. I reached out to her because I recognized a fellow survivor. I recognized a brilliant, highly analytical African-American woman who had fought tooth and nail for every single ounce of her success, only to be severely deceived by the exact same manipulative people who had tormented me for 3 decades. We had both been ruthlessly targeted by their greed. We had both been gaslit into questioning our own reality. And most importantly, we had both decisively destroyed them when we finally uncovered the absolute truth. I had invited Kendra to a private lunch exactly 1 week after her divorce was finalized. I did not offer her a shoulder to cry on. I slid a highly lucrative, ironclad employment contract across the table. I told her that Sinclair Biotech was rapidly expanding its operations, and I needed an apex predator to completely restructure my corporate human resources department. I needed someone who could spot a liar from a mile away and who possessed the ruthless efficiency required to scale a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. I offered her the position of Senior Director of Human Resources, complete with a massive compensation package, comprehensive executive benefits, and highly generous stock options. She had read the contract, looked me dead in the eyes, and signed it right there in the restaurant without a single moment of hesitation. Over the past 6 months, our professional relationship had evolved into something far more profound than standard corporate networking. We were no longer simply a chief executive and a department director. We had forged a bond crafted in the intense fires of shared betrayal and mutual, absolute retaliation. We became an impenetrable, terrifyingly effective team. Kendra completely gutted the outdated hiring protocols of my newly acquired distribution centers. She ruthlessly fired any remaining middle managers who had been even slightly complicit in Jason's extensive embezzlement schemes. She replaced the toxic corporate culture with a merit-based, highly aggressive infrastructure that completely optimized our entire West Coast supply chain. While I dominated the complex scientific research and the cutthroat venture capital negotiations, Kendra flawlessly managed the immense human capital required to keep the massive Sinclair machine running at maximum velocity. We were 2 incredibly powerful women who had violently rejected the subservient roles assigned to us by a corrupt, patriarchal family dynamic. Together, we were actively building an untouchable corporate empire. This was the true definition of a chosen family. It was a bond built on profound mutual respect, undeniable competence, and fierce loyalty, rather than the toxic, conditional obligations of biological bloodlines. Kendra reached my desk and set a thick, meticulously organized presentation folder onto the polished glass surface. Her signature, sharp, professional smile played at the corners of her mouth. The dynamic between us was incredibly fluid and highly efficient. We did not need to constantly recount the ugly, dramatic history that had originally brought us together in this building. We simply acknowledged our shared victory through our relentless, unified drive to completely dominate our industry sector. I extensively reviewed the final vetting reports for the new executive teams across all regional facilities, Kendra stated, her voice projecting absolute confidence and crisp, clear authority. I personally conducted the final round of high-level interviews for the upcoming regional directors. I immediately eliminated the candidates who relied on fabricated corporate buzzwords and exclusively selected the individuals who demonstrated actual, measurable, and verifiable results. I also finalized the stringent compliance restructuring for the new distribution hubs we acquired last quarter. The corporate transition is completely seamless and fully operational. She gently tapped the heavy folder with her impeccably manicured finger, her dark eyes locking onto mine with a shared, victorious intensity that spoke volumes. Everything is absolutely ready for the next massive branch expansion, boss, Kendra announced proudly. I looked down at the immaculate, highly detailed recruitment report resting on my marble desk. I thought about the broken, desperate girl who had thrown her graduation cap into a rusted trash can 4 years ago, entirely convinced she was completely alone and utterly worthless in this world. I looked back up at the brilliant, fierce woman standing right in front of me, a woman who had actively chosen to stand by my side and help build this phenomenal, unstoppable empire. I raised my steaming mug of black coffee high into the air, offering a silent, powerful toast to our shared resilience, our undeniable success, and the absolute, permanent destruction of the miserable people who had desperately tried to ruin us. "Great job, partner," I said. I turned back toward the massive glass windows after Kendra left the room. The morning sun was climbing higher over the Seattle skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the bustling city streets far below my executive suite. Millions of people were rushing to their jobs, navigating their own complex lives, entirely unaware of the massive corporate war that had just concluded within these 4 walls. I pressed the warm ceramic mug against my palms, feeling the heat radiate through my skin. I watched the tiny ant-like cars navigating the concrete arteries of the city, moving in perfect, organized chaos. It was a beautiful, intricate system of constant forward motion and boundless potential. 4 years ago, my own forward motion had been violently brought to a sudden, crushing halt in a desolate university parking lot. I had stood there, clutching a useless bouquet of cheap grocery store flowers, completely shattered by the realization that my biological parents valued a backyard party more than my entire academic existence. I had felt entirely hollowed out, stripped of my dignity, and utterly convinced that my lack of a supportive family meant I was inherently defective. I believed that because my own mother and father did not want to celebrate me, I simply was not worth celebrating. Society constantly feeds us a highly romanticized, incredibly dangerous narrative about biological connections. People who have never experienced the suffocating grip of a toxic household love to preach about forgiveness and unconditional loyalty. They eagerly repeat tired, meaningless phrases. They insist that you only get one mother and one father, implying that you must endure endless psychological torture simply because of a shared genetic sequence. They demand that you keep the door open for people who actively try to burn your entire house to the ground. I categorically reject that narrative entirely. I looked down at my pristine white designer suit, a physical manifestation of the impenetrable armor I had painstakingly forged from my own sheer willpower. I did not survive my family by offering them endless forgiveness or turning the other cheek. I survived by treating their toxic manipulation like a lethal virus. I survived by aggressively amputating the infected limbs before the poison could reach my heart and destroy my future. Many people might look at my actions and call me utterly ruthless. They might say that orchestrating the total financial and legal destruction of my own brother was an act of extreme, unforgivable vindictiveness. They might argue that leaving my parents to face the harsh realities of poverty after they lost their foreclosed suburban mansion was cold and entirely heartless. But they do not understand the fundamental, ugly truth of surviving severe emotional abuse. Many people say that blood ties can never be severed, but they do not understand that sometimes abandoning those who share your bloodline is not an act of cruelty. It is the highest form of self-preservation. It is a necessary, calculated defensive maneuver required to save your own life. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. You cannot build a thriving, secure future while constantly carrying the heavy, suffocating anchor of a family that desperately wants to see you drown. My parents and my brother demanded my absolute loyalty, but they only ever offered me profound exploitation in return. They wanted to harvest my resources, drain my savings, and mock my ambitions, all while expecting me to smile and thank them for the privilege of being their designated punching bag. When I finally removed their access to my life, their entire fabricated reality collapsed because it was built entirely on my stolen energy. Their downfall was not my revenge. It was simply the inescapable consequence of their own profound, relentless greed. I took another slow sip of my coffee, feeling an overwhelming, profound sense of peace settle deeply into my chest. I thought about Kendra sitting in her new executive office down the hall, flawlessly managing my corporate infrastructure. We had walked through absolute hell, betrayed by the exact same people, but we had emerged completely victorious. We had forged an alliance that was infinitely stronger than any biological connection. I finally understood the true definition of family. Family is not a legal obligation. Family is not the group of people who share your last name or your facial features. Family is not the people who leave you behind in a parking lot to go eat barbecue and celebrate a leased sports car. Family is the people who are standing there, waiting for you at the finish line. Family is the people who actively choose to stand by your side when the absolute worst storms hit. They are the people who respect your boundaries, celebrate your genuine victories, and fiercely protect your peace. I placed my empty coffee mug gently onto the polished glass surface of my marble desk. I looked at the framed doctoral degree hanging proudly on my office wall, the exact same degree my father had called a useless piece of paper. It was now the foundational cornerstone of a multi-billion-dollar biomedical empire. I had taken their brutal rejection and weaponized it into an unstoppable, towering success. I had built a fortress they could never, ever breach. If there is no one waiting for you at the finish line, build your own finish line. Do not waste your precious energy begging toxic people to suddenly care about your achievements. Use that pain as your ultimate fuel. Walk away from their table and build your own life so incredibly high and so undeniably magnificent that they can only ever look up at it from the dirt. Have you ever had to cut contact with toxic relatives to save yourself? Please share your story in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of absolute resilience, vindication, and powerful new beginnings. Thank you for walking this journey with me. And remember, your ultimate success is the only closure you will ever need. The most profound lesson we can take away from this journey is that biological DNA does not automatically grant someone a permanent, unconditional pass into your life. Society heavily romanticizes the concept of blood ties, often pressuring us to endure endless emotional manipulation and financial exploitation under the guise of family loyalty. We are constantly taught to forgive the unforgivable simply because we share a last name. However, true loyalty must always be reciprocal. When the very people who are supposed to protect, nurture, and celebrate you consistently choose to belittle your massive achievements and exploit your hard-earned resources, holding on to them is not a virtue. It is pure self-sabotage. Walking away from a deeply toxic family dynamic is frequently misjudged as an act of cold-hearted cruelty. In reality, it is the absolute highest form of self-preservation. It takes immense, undeniable courage to look at an empty auditorium and firmly decide that you will no longer beg for pathetic scraps of affection. By aggressively severing the toxic ties that constantly drain your mental and financial energy, you actively create the necessary space to build an untouchable empire of your own. Your intrinsic worth is never determined by those who are entirely too blind or too arrogant to see it. It is forged in the silent, relentless hours of hard work you put in long after they have turned their backs on you. Ultimately, we learn that family is an active choice. It is found in the resilient people who fiercely stand by you in the trenches, who completely respect your boundaries, and who cheer the absolute loudest at your finish line. You have the ultimate power to redefine your reality. Have you ever had to make the incredibly difficult choice to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace and build your own success? Share your empowering journey in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe to join our community of strong, self-made survivors.